recently we saw O1 come out in December. There was so much fanfare about it, was because it was scoring really high, or at least the pro mode with extra test time compute. So it was given more time to answer questions. It was doing really well on RKGI's benchmark. The creators of the benchmark came out and said, no, this wasn't a suitable test. It never was. Now we have to create something else. So I feel like thinking a little bit further ahead and creating tests that are going to stand the test of time.
You're listening to the AI Native Dev, brought to you by Tesla. On today's episode of the AI Native Dev, we're going to have a very practical session where we're going to be talking with Farhath here, who's going to be telling us about his perfect development environment, how he uses AI today in his flows, some of the most amazing tools that he's used and hasn't used because he hasn't had time, or maybe they don't exist. So we're going to have a deep dive into what a good AI-powered developer environment looks like, and hopefully there'll be a ton of practical tips. Farhath, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm a freelance software AI engineer. So I'm working on multiple different products, and I've been using AI extensively for the last year and a half, looking into different tools, testing them out, comparing them, playing around with different models, and just trying to use it as much in my development workflow as possible.
And every time we chat, there's always some new tool that you mention, and I'm like, oh yeah, now I have to add that to the list. You're one of the people who is always like on the latest cusp of the news and trying out new tools. So I'm really excited to have this chat with you today. We're going to say, let's kick off with the scenario. Picture the scene. You're sat at your desk, but you're about to develop a new application. Let's talk about what your environment looks like. First of all, your physical environment. Lights on, off, low when you code?
During the day, I'm getting enough sunlight. I'm working. During the night, I just have a small lamp, light up, but mostly dark.
Mostly dark.
Mode. Yeah.
proper hacker mode. Okay. Hoodie as well. What's your ideal coding drink?
Water.
Just water. No caffeine.
No, I try to avoid it, and I don't want to become dependent. I kind of rely on staying healthy, staying fit and healthy, and I keep a couple liters of water, but also next to me, and probably go through them. Probably up 4 times.
Jeez. Wow. Snacks while you code?
I don't.
No snacks?
I don't like getting my keyboard messy.
Okay, I like that. Oh, you've got a Keytron keyboard as well, right? Yeah. Is it a clicky one?
Yeah.
It is. I thought, now I'm working at home. This is my previous role. Now I'm working at home. I can get a clicky keyboard and not annoy anyone in the office. And now I realize how annoying it is for everyone on Zoom as I'm tapping away.
I've noticed that as well.
Okay. When you code, what's your favorite distraction? Do you play music? Are you complete silence? Do you have a TV going in the background?
So typically I'm in silence. I enjoy just being able to think and write down notes and that kind of stuff. But I do also still work when I'm eating. If I'm on like a lunch break or something like that, what I've started doing recently is having the TV on.
Yeah.
And I used to do research, like having my references on one screen and my notes on another. Now what I'm doing is, with advancements in AI tooling, I've been using, for example, a cursor ID, running an agentic workflow on a easy ticket. So I'm splitting my tickets into more difficult ones that I'm definitely going to have to pay a lot of attention to, but smaller things that I know the AI is capable of, I'll just give it to it while I'm having a snack, eating, and come back to it in a few minutes. If it's got it done, perfect. If not, then just run it again. So I can even be productive when I'm
Yeah. Awesome. So let's jump into that then. What does your actual development environment look like? You mentioned Cursor there. Mac or PC?
PC with WSL.
Okay. And on top of that then, you mentioned Cursor. Is that your favorite IDE/AI dev assistant?
So typically I'm using Cursor nowadays. I see myself coming back to it again and again because I just started with it and they do release features on a regular basis. But I've got a few I'm looking at right now. Windsurf recently released their Wave 2. So they released a bunch of features together, and they added web search, and they've already got agentic workflows where it can do a bunch of stuff for you, but now it can do a web search where you can ask it to implement a latest API.
Yeah.
You can go and do a web search, find the top links, extract the information, and then implement it for you based on the docs that it found and all that kind of stuff. So that could be a game changer. In Cursor, I have to upload docs.
Yeah.
It does have web search, but I don't think it's as intuitive as Windsurf has just made it in the last week, in the last couple of days.
Yeah.
So I definitely want to check that out. There's also Klein, which is an open source VS Code extension. And it very much does similar things, but they recently released a feature where you can now select, so you've already been able to select your LLMs, which I love, having the choice of what large language models to use. They've added something called architect mode and edit mode, which is stolen from another open source tool called Ada, but that's a CLI tool. But architect mode allows you to, so you can select a module to be the architect. For this, quite good options. It seems like people are gravitating towards OpenAI's O1 and recently DeepSeek's R1, because it's good at thinking and it can really create a good plan of what to create. And for the edit mode, people are still defaulting to Sonnet 3.5, called Sonnet 3.5. It just seems to just be sticking around, even though it was released quite a while ago. I'm really excited to see what they're going to release next. I'm waiting on Claude 4 for sure.
Yeah, interesting. And kind of you mentioned Cursor, because perhaps it was one of the first ones that you tried and first ones were you a VS Code user before that, or?
Yeah,
you were. So it's very familiar in terms of the IDE, the UI as well, and then you landed on Cursor. What do you feel would be the killer feature that would take you away from Cursor right now? What is your biggest need from the IDE right now that you don't have?
I'm seeing a lot. So the stuff I mentioned already are very attractive features.
Yeah. There
was a fork of Klein recently. It was called RuClein. They just recently renamed it to RuCode. They've added prompt enhancement, which is pretty nice, which I think everyone should do. So you type in a prompt, click a button, and it can improve it for you. But they also added, which is even cooler, I think, is like personalities. I don't know if that's exactly the name.
Yeah.
But you can ask it to be a QA engineer, and it can create a personality for that. You can ask it to be a UI UX designer that that understands accessibility really well, and it can create a personality for that. So you can create personalities and save them that can behave in certain ways, like certain roles within software engineering itself.
Yeah,
so that's something really cool. Something I'd really like to see that I haven't seen anyone do yet. I've been thinking about this for quite a while now, is style references. So Midjourney, the image generator, I used to play around with it quite a lot last year. For a period, I was doing it every weekend, just messing around with stuff. They have this cool thing called style reference. So you can generate an image and then provide it another image as a style reference. So it's like format painting in your word processor. You select some text with certain formatting, select another piece of text, apply that. I think it'd be really cool to have that for code.
Yeah.
So it could copy that. So in Midjourney, for example, for the images, it copied the artistic style, the colors, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
For code, it could be the language, how you structure your code, the level of commenting you do, all this other kind of stuff.
Yeah. And even the architecture or the design, how you would go about designing it, so that components that you build as one and have a similar architecture, whether that's good or bad.
Yeah, because every artist has their own unique style.
Right.
It's the same for developers, right? There is some creativity to it. There's science to it. There's some creativity to it. And I'd really like to be able to copy that. Also, when I'm looking for tools and libraries, I always find there's so many options. And this isn't something that's going to help it, but what would be cool is a tool that could analyze different libraries that do the same thing and take the best features from each. And like that style reference I've said before, do it in the certain language that you need it.
Exactly. Or almost merge those to create something that is ideal for what you want, your needs.
So this is using the fastest language for it. This one's got this incredible feature. This one has integrations with all these other things. All this stuff is out there. There's so many great devs creating. Even I'm seeing repos that are huge, but not the best tools, and smaller repos, and even really niche things where a lone developer has created a really cool feature, but it's just not gaining traction. Or if you could find all of this and then just have a tool that merges them all together to be the perfect tool.
Nice. Let's talk a bit deeper into your usage of Cursor. I guess, do you use it for project creation from scratch? Do you use it more for just like slight changes to existing projects? What's your typical, or do you do it irrespective of what your goal is? You just go ahead and use Cursor for everything?
So I don't actually start with Cursor. Usually I go to Perplexity and do some research on what stack libraries and tools would be useful for my project. So this is why the tool that I mentioned earlier that I'd like to create, I would love to exist, because I manually go through the different tools and libraries and look at them, analyze them, see if they're going to be good for what I'm trying to build. After the stack, I'll probably then go into Cursor and build a Cursor rules file. So give it some context of my project and the rules I want it to follow. So how it should go about writing comments, how it should make edits.
Style like comments that you mentioned.
Exactly.
Yeah.
With that, and then I'd probably start coding. And then I usually tend to start with the back end.
Yeah.
So some people like to see what they're building first. I think that is nice.
Yeah.
But I feel like the back end and the business logic is the meat of the program. And actually for the front end, I actually do that separately. So what I typically do is go into Claude and start experimenting, generating UIs. And it has a nice preview in the artifacts screen. And then what I do is after I've got a sitemap with a bunch of different screens generated, I ask it to give me this in text form. I go to V0 and ask it to generate me these pages with these elements using a certain UI library, like ShadCN, for example, is one that I typically go back to again and again. And that way I get really nice, consistent pages that just have, because what AI tools don't have is taste. Yeah. Providing them a tool, providing my UI library like that, I can ensure a nice quality UI. And I usually take the UI code that V0 is generated, the backend stuff, and at some point I'll merge them together, ask it to group it together, and it's quite good at that.
Yeah. When do you think about the data model? Do you do that before the backend, or you build the backend and the data model together at the same time?
Data model first.
Data model first. So you do data model, then start building the backend to address the data model and to connect with the data model, and the UI on top of that.
Exactly.
Yeah, amazing. And so everything you do in Claude is throwaway, it's prototype only, and just trying to almost like pulling out a doc that kind of describes what you're trying to do. Is it a learning thing?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty throwaway. It's more for experimentation.
Yeah.
I think AI is really good for helping you ideate, even if you have it all in Claude projects, or I know ChatGPT has the same thing now as well. Just opening a new chat and asking it so it knows it based on the documents you provided about your project. It knows what you're trying to create. It knows maybe if you've added features that you want, it knows about those, but it can help you expand on those. What features do you think would be good for these users, depending if it's a consumer product, business to business, or just a utility used by a company internally? For experimenting with ideas, it's really good. And even something that I've created is a sort of rubber ducky tool. Okay. So sometimes, obviously, everyone, as most developers know, it's quite nice to be able to talk to someone, or what a lot of developers do is talk to a little rubber duck to help them work through problems. What I've done is use OpenAI's real-time API to create a senior engineer rubber duck for me. So when I think something might be the right way to do it, but I know there's other options, I ask it, okay, so what are the pros and cons of this way of doing it? Do you have any other suggestions of how I could improve this? By telling it to act as a very high-level engineer, it typically gives me very good suggestions. And I've found that I'm writing better code because of it. And I think engineers of every level, even someone at a very high level, having that extra advice or that extra perspective is really useful, but especially for junior developers, for learning when you don't know about standards and how you should be going about things, or what technology you should be using. Like when you're that early on, I remember being there, you don't know about anything that exists. You try and write everything from scratch. And when there are incredible libraries and industry standards that you should be using, convention. So asking it about best convention, how to keep your code dry, is really good.
So let's summarize where we are right now then. You're about to start a new project, sorry. So you dim the light slightly. Great. You got yourself the 6 gallons of water behind you. So you're drinking some water, no snacks. You're hungry at this point. You start off with Claude, a little bit of Perplexity, do a bit of prototyping. You build that in, get a little rule set in Cursor. Then you start building in Cursor. Data model first, which you should already know a little bit about from your prototype. Then you start actually building code from there. In terms of then how you then build tests, how you build documentation, all those other kind of parts around that. Are you using Cursor for that? Is there a second tool, third tool that you use for the other kind of pieces there?
So in terms of documentation, currently I quite so Cursor's not just good at code, it's really good at text. Right? So I'd go and start writing something I'd maybe make a docs file, start writing whatever that specific file is about.
What model are you using under the covers? Is it Claude again, or is it?
Yeah, I'm typically sticking to Claude.
Okay, which a lot of people tend to say that's a little bit better at things like documentation and the kind of the written word as well, right?
Exactly. So sounding like a human, right? OpenAI's models maybe not so much sometimes. I'd maybe start writing the docs, and then I can ask it to write the rest based on my project. I can pass the context of my project and ask it to write the rest, or if it's if I'm actually for the data models, actually for my databases, I'm typically starting off with a general idea of what I want, asking it to expand on these and give me suggestions. And then I accept some of the suggestions, change some of the suggestions, and yeah, that's how I go about it with documentation for now. I know there are better tools for the job. I haven't started using them yet, but it's definitely on the list of something that I want to start incorporating.
Yeah, we had the swim guys on the podcast earlier, actually, which is one of the, which is a tool that I see growing in popularity. That could be an interesting one to look at. Then when you're thinking about other things, so test, for example, do you use Claude, do you use Cursor to also write tests and things like that, or are you using any of the AI test frameworks and tools?
Typically, right now,
or do you test in production? That's cool. That's a cool answer too.
I start off not writing tests. I find it easier to change the code a lot early on. Like early on, when I'm starting off with a project, I'm changing the code a lot. So I don't want to write tests that are breaking constantly. But afterwards, I'm typically using Cursor right now. But again, I want to experiment with a lot of other tools. I know there are a lot of other really good options for that.
Okay, cool. Then you go to deploy. Any DevOps style deployment tools, AI tools you use? What's your typical path to production?
In my deployment at the moment, I'm not using many AI tools, but I have seen some good tools, for example, Eraser.io, which is quite good for diagramming. So if you are trying to build a whole cloud architecture, it can be quite good for visualizing what you're trying to build.
Oh, interesting. Okay, cool. When we then think about, I guess, an interesting one, which is maybe a slight choice, or maybe not a choice these days, in terms of the language that you use for your application. Do you care about the language as much these days? Would you dip into languages that you are not as familiar with, more likely to, because of AI tools?
Yes, I've always felt like I'm pretty language agnostic. I started mostly with Python. I did Java most at university. And I do mostly JavaScript now, but along the years, I've done probably another half dozen, played around with half dozen other languages as well. So I've already been quite language agnostic, but I'm far more likely to dip my toes into a new language now because I know there's a lot less friction in being able to learn it. Back in the day, for example, when I built a Swift app many years ago, this is when Swift just came out, there were no good tutorials on how to do anything, and they were changing the syntax every week. Code that I wrote one day would be broken the next. And this was happening constantly. Now with AI tools, they can analyze the new docs instantly. As soon as it's released, they can update the docs that they've got stored, that they've indexed, and they can help you. So you don't need to wait on other people, other developers to create this content for you. You can go straight to the docs, the source of truth, and use that to start experimenting. So it's just all around a lot easier.
Oh, interesting. One other last question before we jump into kind of more advice based. In terms of the flow that you've got when you check code in, PRs, those types of things, any advice you'd give in and around various PR, AR tools that kind of like maybe do code reviews or those types of things, or do you heavily rely on that senior developer doc as your code reviewer?
I think right now I rely on the advice I get from talking to AI, different chatbots and stuff like that. It's something that I, again, want to start implementing a code review in my CI/CD. So it automatically reviews it, gives advice, and maybe even creates a commit with changes on a fork. So I've seen a bunch of these tools. Recently, I heard about Sagittal AI's Neo at an event. So these are things I'm definitely looking into starting to implement now in my projects for sure.
Awesome. In terms of advice, like practical advice that you'd give for developers who are trying to build AI into their developer process and workflow, what's like the top tips you would give a developer who is trying to be more proficient in using AI today in their workflows?
So when it comes to building with AI, I think it's really easy to prototype, but quite hard to get into production. So for those just starting out, I would start playing around with different models. And because each model feels like its own personality. Imagine them like people. They respond in different ways, how they talk, the limits of what they're allowed to speak about, like the guardrails that we put in place, and compare the speed, the quality of the responses, and accuracy. Cost as well is a big one. I'd say OpenRouter is quite a good thing to use. So it basically has collated APIs for all these different models, and it means that you can just put some credit into your OpenRouter account and start using all these different models in your applications. So that's definitely something I'd recommend. Play around with both open source and proprietary models. So most people start with OpenAI. It's definitely OpenAI's models, definitely a good starter. But there's a whole world of open source models out there that are incredible.
Yeah.
DeepSeek, for example, that was just released, matched OpenAI's latest model O1 in performance, it seems, from the benchmarks and a lot of testing that people have done.
Yeah.
So play around with open source models. I feel like they're going to be very big this year. You can use, if you want to play around with them locally on your computer, you can use tools like Ollama or LM Studio. So there are a bunch of libraries that help you build with AI. For example, LangChain is probably one that everyone's heard of.
Yeah.
Some people say it's a little bit bloated. So you can absolutely write these things from scratch as well. And because we're at quite an early stage, it's a really useful way to learn about how all this stuff works with AI engineering. Learn how to prompt engineer. This is a really big one. You can massively increase the quality of what your responses you get and the products you're building by learning how to prompt engineer properly.
Yeah.
And then play around with add-ons like RAG, which helps you stop hallucinations, use your own data, tools, create tools and function calling, like giving it access to the web search and other sorts of things like this. And then there are agent frameworks as well that you can start playing around with to do more advanced things. They're really good to start dipping your toes into agents, and this opens up a whole world of possibilities. And then also for production, you really want to start monitoring. You want monitoring observability into the inputs and outputs of your LLM requests. You want to monitor what's working with your prompts and iterate on them. So improve them over time to get better responses. And also you want to run these like thousands of times. And also you want to try playing around with adversarial prompts. Is your application breaking when someone's trying to break it? Like, you cannot rely on your users to always have the best of intentions with your application. So for production, there's so much more you need to think about. That's my advice for.
Wow, so there's a whole bunch of like things there. Interesting you start with models first. Do you think individuals will have two different developers having a preferred different model? Is that based on style? Is that based on accuracy, and people have different expectations? Why do you think different developers will choose different models?
So developers should try different models, and they'll have different preferences based on their use case. So you have smaller models, which are faster, cheaper, and maybe don't have, so for example, Microsoft has their Phi model. 5.4 was recently released. It's very good. In my use, it's hallucinating. It told you that it doesn't know the answer. So these small models that typically don't have the world knowledge, for a lot of applications, you don't need those. So it's better to save cost and to get faster responses to go for smaller models. Larger models, maybe you do need more creativity. And there are different models tell stories in different ways. You want something more creative.
So it's almost it's almost like the usage patterns of how you would use that model, what is most important in the UX of a developer using that model, which is one of the nice reasons we're seeing more and more tools almost offering which model do you want to use for this tool, which kind of makes it that much nicer.
On that point, that's another thing. I don't think we're going to have one model that's going to rule them all. I think we're going to have different models for different use cases that specialize on different data sets. And that's really why you want to be experimenting with different models. Depending on your use case, you're going to be using wildly different models. There's so many coming out now. Play around, experiment. Try them out.
Amazing. So we talked about a ton of different tools. Let's talk about the tools that don't exist. This is the hard bit, right? If there is a tool, or if there is a problem that you have today where you think, do you know what, I'd really love for an AI tool to exist that will take this pain away, what would that be? What's the pain? What's the tool?
I think I'd like to see better benchmarks. So oftentimes we're seeing models perform better than another model on a benchmark. And then that's not translating really well to the real world use cases. Once developers get their hands on it and people start experimenting with the outputs and for their use cases. So recently we saw O1 come out in December, in the 12 days of shipness. And part of the reason why there was so much fanfare about it was because it was scoring really high, or at least the pro mode with extra test time compute. So it was given more time to answer questions. It was doing really well on ArcAGI's benchmark. And ArcAGI came and said, so for the longest time, this has been seen as if once you start scoring really well on this, we're really close to AGI. And the creators of the benchmark came out and said, no, this wasn't a suitable test. It never was. Now we have to create something else. So I feel like thinking a little bit further ahead and creating tests that are going to stand the test of time.
And benchmarks are always hard, right? Because every time someone puts a benchmark out, that benchmark's there to be played. And I think models are going to be no different in that respect. And it leads on from what you just said as well about developers choosing the best model for them if they have some level of realistic expectations to what they can expect based on their needs, that will give them a short list at least of models that they can try. Yeah, no, I think that's a nice request rather that would benefit us as an industry for sure. What about tools existing tools then today that you really want to play with but just haven't had time? What would be on your list of, if you had a week to play with the various tools, what would you pick?
Something that I'd really like to play around with is Anthropic's MCP, Model Context Protocol, that they released end of last year. So it allows different data sources to be connected and allows you to use your AI tools with them. So for example, you create these things called servers. It comes with a few. So you have clients. The Claude desktop app is an example of a client. It's not the only one. You can actually create your own, but it has access to these tools. For example, a GitHub server. You can essentially chat with Claude in the Claude desktop app. It can do stuff in your GitHub repositories. You can create them for you and modify them. But there are lots of examples of tools you can add to it. So for my development workflow, it'd be quite useful to, for example, to connect it to Jira or my ticket monitoring platform. And I typically write what I need to do in lists. I could get it in one go, Claude, to make my list suitable for my team to look at, clean it up, and then send it to Jira. And it could have another tool that allows it to act on those tickets. So really agentic behavior is something that it could enable. That's definitely something I want to play around with. Pair AI, it's another VS Code fork IDE. But I think what they're doing a little bit different is they're not building the piece themselves. I think they're trying to be some modular alternatives to some of the other ones like Cursor. They allow you to bring other tools. So, for example, your code completion, the type of thing everyone's been talking about, your code completion, they allow you to bring that in, something else for your chat, something else for essentially every piece where AI is included in the IDE, they allow you to use different services.
Interesting.
So you can use the best of each, best in class software for each, and maybe build your own solution. So that's something that I've heard about, read about a bit, but definitely want to play around with a bit more.
You mentioned DeepSeek as well. Is that something that you've had much chance to play with just yet, or is that a feature as well?
So I've played around with it in the chat interface on the website, not the API so much. Yeah, DeepSeek came out about a week ago. And
at the time of recording.
So I think the reason DeepSeek has gone so viral, partly is because they're offering the API for free. So DeepSeek on the App Store has hit #1 on both the US and European app stores. But it's a model trained for under 6 million. DeepSeek's R1 model was trained for under 6 million. And it seems like from the benchmark tests and from some user testing that it is on par with OpenAI's O1 reasoning model, which is trained for people are thinking in the hundreds of millions. So much cheaper. It came out of China, and I think everyone's really heard about this. I think part of it was because it caused quite a ruckus in the stock market. So Nvidia went down 16%. I actually saw Meta rise. I think partly because they are also doing open source models with their Llama series. And to be honest, I wasn't too surprised by this. So what we've been seeing over the last 2 years is that open source has not been too far behind proprietary. So there was like that famous quote, "We have no moat," from a leaked Google memo about how the models themselves are not enough to give you a competitive advantage, especially when big tech has been chucking so much money into this. It's quite interesting. But open source has been around, maybe started off 6 months behind, so it goes to 3 months, and then O1 was released last month, R1 released this month behind. We've been seeing the gap close over time, so I'm not too surprised. And again, with the cost, we've seen models train, the first model to train at a certain level, state of the art, costing tons of money. And then pretty soon after, we're seeing lots of smaller AI research labs come out with models that are equivalent, but trained at much smaller costs. This has been happening for quite a while already. And I think people are sort of drawing the wrong conclusions. People are saying that, oh, look, the American research labs have been spending so much money and they are completely screwed. Now, obviously, maybe, but I think that's the wrong conclusion to take from this. So DeepSeek's research was open sourced. So they've written papers about it, how they went about creating it. This knowledge is going to be taken by all the American research labs, big tech, and they're going to recreate it, improve their own models, make them a lot cheaper. And they also have a hardware advantage
Mm-hmm.
because of the embargoes of the latest chips not being allowed to be sold to China.
Mm-hmm.
So there's still a massive hardware advantage that the US has and the big tech companies have. And what they're going to do is take this research, make their models better. And there's something called Javon's paradox. Have you heard of it?
No.
So it's when something gets more efficient, you'd expect us to be using less of it.
Yeah.
So in terms of compute,
Oh, I see,
when it's getting cheaper in terms of compute, you'd expect us to use less.
Mm-hmm.
Because the price is coming down so much, it opens up so much more utility that usage goes up like crazy.
Yeah.
And now we have even higher demand for compute.
Yeah.
So Nvidia's stock price going down, I think makes no sense.
Yeah.
People saying that big tech is in a bad position, I would say no, because they're not going to stop here. So if we were just going to stop at this level of models, maybe people would have a case.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole point of these research labs is to be pushing the limits and building the best models that they can.
Mm-hmm.
And for that, you require compute.
Yeah.
So I think, DeepSeek is great, and it's amazing that this is all happening in January. It's pushing more competition between all the different labs and different companies creating these models. And I think we're just going to see, I think this is just great for us.
Yeah.
It means that we're getting better models. OpenAI made the decision when the O3 mini model is going to be released soon, and they said that's going to be free for everybody.
Yeah.
And I believe that's in part due to the pressure from DeepSeek.
Yeah. I'd feel stressed if I worked for a model company, wouldn't you? Just constantly just feeling like, oh my gosh, it's constant jumping, who's jumping ahead at which time, and you're having to always catch up or try and keep that lead, right? This must be pretty stressful to keep pushing. Let's talk about one of the other things, actually, just in terms of hackathon projects, because I know hackathons have been wildly popular again now with just seeing whether it's an internal company hackathon where people are just trying to work out how they can use AI to improve their processes or automations and things like that. Any good hackathon style projects that you've seen recently?
So I did see a project recently where these two guys, they built using Gemini 2.0 Flash, which is a multimodal model. So it can understand images, video, and speech. So as well as text, and give responses as well in audio or text form. What they did was they built an app you'd use to film your house. So it would analyze everything inside your house using another object detection model, I think, that they used. And it makes a catalog of all your belongings, valuable possessions in your house. And the use case for this was actually insurance. So if usually you'd have to estimate the value of your property and possessions, if you undervalue this, if something, God forbid, was to go wrong, then you're not going to get full compensation. If you overbid, then the premiums you're paying are too high. They built this in 2 days. 10 minutes you walk around your house. It catalogs all your items, gives you a valuation, and now this can be used by insurance companies. Obviously, with more development, like I said, production takes a while to do, but it could be used by insurance companies to value your properties. As much as that sounds useful, it also sounds like a security nightmare. But in a couple of days, it's amazing what you can do with that kind of thing. So that's brilliant. Final question. You obviously read a ton, watching YouTube, watching clips of the new developments of various AI tools and methodologies. Where do you go, though, to maybe pick 2 or 3 sites? Where are the sources of news and good in-depth content for you? I use a huge variety of sources. Probably what I use the most is YouTube. So my few channels I'd recommend are for developers, Indie Dev Dan and All About AI. I feel like they really do their due diligence when it comes to using the latest tools, models, and having good insight. And there's also AI Explained, which is, I feel like he talks more about the broader implications of the developments that are happening. So to stay more up to date with the news, I feel like that's another good channel. I also use Discord, so following different project Discords. There's usually a lot going on there. People are building all types of interesting projects. Twitter and Reddit are really good for getting people's perspective. Like the latest news, when someone hears about something, they will post about it on Twitter. When people have been experimenting about stuff, they'll have discussions about it on Reddit. I feel like these are very good platforms to be using, and a lot of the top researchers and companies are all on Twitter as well, constantly posting about stuff. So it's really, and researchers, so it's that first source of information where it's first.
Where it hits.
Comes to first. Product Hunt is a really good resource as well. So these are projects that are people have really thought about. So not just demos.
Yeah.
People are really thinking, how am I going to get this to production?
Mm-hmm.
And tons of really innovative stuff there. And plus, it ranks itself, right? So people vote and rank. Really see the best of what's coming out.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Lots of great tips there as to where people can go. Amazing, Farhath. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. And yeah, great to have the practical tips and the user's perspective as to what they're using. So thank you very much for sharing.
No worries.
And for those of you who are interested in our Discord and YouTube, of course, got the AI Native Dev on YouTube, as well as Discord, where we could talk about a ton of news, tips, tricks, and various new tools and things that people are trying in our AI ecosystem as well. Make sure you subscribe if you like the content, enjoying the content, and thanks very much for listening. Tune into the next episode. Thank you.
See ya.
Thanks for tuning in. Join us next time on the AI Native Dev, brought to you by Tesla.